Before we get into the video, I of course want to give huge thanks because we've reached 1,000 subscribers. We actually got it like 2 to 3 days ago, so I know this video is late, and I think we're already past like 1,050 at this point. So, I mean, that's amazing, but this honestly is awesome. I'm kind of speechless. We've had absolutely unprecedented growth on the channel in the past month alone, so whether you were here in the first 100 or just subscribed yesterday, just know that I appreciate you, and I hope that sometime within the next months or years even, you can brag to your fellow weebs that you were in the first 1,000 or 1,056 subscribers of the Anime Culture Corner. I'm going to continue to improve my editing, my voiceovers, and my knowledge of anime and manga in general because we're only going up, guys. So get ready for a fun ride. Anyway, on to the topic of the video. I thought that for this landmark, I would put together 5 of my favorite underrated anime. It's something more personal, you know, more in tune with my tastes because I am just a dude with favorites and shows that I personally love. So I'm coming in here unscripted but with 5 anime of various lengths and genres. So I hope that among the 5, since I tried to make them all very different, you'll at least find one that interests you and that you want to watch after leaving this video. And you might know a number of shows on this list, but to me they either feel criminally unrecognized or just aren't talked about enough in the circles that I'm part of. This video isn't going to be really heavily edited, or at least not at the level that I normally hold myself to, because of course it's really just a glorified list of recommendations and it's a pretty long video. I just want to remind you again before we get started though that all of these are just my opinion. So thank you again for 1,000 subscribers, and let's get into the recommendations. First is Orange. Orange is a slice of life romance anime with 13 episodes and a movie. So if you want a little sweet show to watch tonight after seeing the video, I think that this is probably the best option out of the 5. Naho Takemiya is a sophomore in high school, and one day she receives a letter from herself. From the future, which she of course didn't believe at first, but after a couple events happen that were of course predicted, she begins to believe it. But the letter from the future isn't all fun and games, you know, like the numbers for the lottery or anything like that. It's actually filled with regrets, and that her current self should keep an eye on the new transfer student Kakeru, because, well, he's not around in the future anymore. And with this letter by her side, Naho is left to protect Kakeru and hopefully change the sad future that awaits both of them. And I'm personally a sucker for time travel, so you already know that I love this show from the start, but it really is super touching. I think I cried honestly more than I should have at multiple points, but it's just incredibly heartwarming to see her get closer to Kakeru and understand his struggles and try and find out, well, what happens to him, what causes it. Which also has really sad twists, as the show demonstrates that life isn't perfect, that things will go wrong. And that even with the knowledge of everything that can and will happen, things will still inevitably not go according to plan. It's really just the embodiment of the question, if you had the choice to go back in time and try changing things, would you do it? I don't think the show is a masterpiece in the sense of the word, but it has a lot of merits to me, and it's worth watching if you're interested not only in slice of life shows, but in ones that have sci-fi aspects as well. I mean, the sci-fi elements go basically undiscussed, which is probably for the better, just to let us focus on the story rather than the logistics of how this girl is sending a letter to the past, how this affects timelines, whether there can be a paradox, how... And I know I'm not great at describing shows, especially slice of life, because it feels very subjective and based on emotion for me, so writing some deep dive analysis for this just didn't feel appropriate. But next on my list is Mushishi. And I think that this is not only the most well-known anime on this list, but by far, in my opinion, the objectively best. Mushishi, to me, is a masterpiece. But Mushishi feels like a show that requires a pretty experienced anime watcher to fully appreciate it. And that may sound elitist, which is not what I'm trying to say here. But the show isn't like super exciting or have this really intriguing or intricate plot. It's very episodic. And most episodes are very slow, but I think the best word to describe Mushishi is immersive. Mushi are the most simple life forms to exist. They come in hundreds of different shapes and forms, but they really have no purpose in the world. Ginko, our main character, is a Mushishi, hence the name, and his goal is to research Mushi to understand their place in the world and how they interact with humans. He follows different rumors and stories of Mushi interacting with humans and animals and how they've affected life, They can benefit people or harm them, or do absolutely nothing. They're generally styled after Japanese and East Asian stories, but of course very primitive in a way. But through this exploration, as are most historical stories involving gods and folk story legends, we see essentially a new moral learned almost every single episode through these tales of Mushi. I really don't think a description can do this show justice because, as I said, its best characteristic in my eyes is immersion. You're part of this world where anything can happen through these Mushi, and you come to see not only how they affect life itself, but what life even means. The soundtrack is beautiful, the visuals are great, and the reason that I said I feel like you need a decent amount of anime experience under your belt before watching is because Mushishi really stretches what anime is. It tackles so many topics way beyond the scope of not just a TV show but entertainment in general, and even though it is of course entertaining, you can tell that the show really doesn't care about that. What matters is the message, the numerous stories that are told in Mushishi, the world it crafts, and it's just absolutely beautiful. It's 3 seasons, around 50 or so episodes with a couple movies, so if you want a really good anime to watch, one that you can really learn from and find meaning in, then this is the one to go for. Next is Space Brothers, which is my personal favorite on this list actually. I think Mushishi is better, but I enjoyed Space Brothers a bit more, I think. The show is long, it's 99 episodes, so if any of you are looking either for a really great, encouraging, funny slice of life, or a long show just to dive straight into, go for Space Brothers. For the plot, we follow 2 brothers, Namba Hibito and Namba Muta, with the latter being the central focus and main character. As children, they both made a vow to each other after seeing a UFO, or so they thought, it's up to yours and their imagination, that they would both become astronauts someday. Muta has the firm belief that an older brother should be one step ahead and guide the younger one, and so once his younger brother Hibito says he'll go to the moon, Muta says he'll go for Mars. And fast forward to the future, and now we see that Muta's life is far from what he imagined it once would be. He's just a normal worker who actually just got fired at an automotive company, while Hibito is actually set to become the first Japanese man to set foot on the moon. Only one of them is truly pursuing their dream right now. But after being fired, Muta gets one last chance. He sees that JAXA, the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, I think, is not only looking for new astronauts, but accepts his application as well. And despite the doubts he has for himself, the mental barrier he has of being a fully grown man finally chasing his dream, he pursues this chance of a lifetime and tries to fulfill the vow he made to himself and his brother decades ago. It's one of the only shows I've seen that really focuses mainly on a character who's pursuing a dream completely rooted in reality. We see it all the time in like shonen shows and fantasy stuff, but what I love about Space Brothers is that it's really just a normal guy trying his hardest to make his dream come true. We see great mirroring and parallelism between him and his brother, a very familiar brotherly bond that I can connect a lot to having brothers myself. And it's really just an awesome ride. He meets like-minded people, has struggles, and competes to qualify himself as a deserving astronaut, both in others' eyes and his own. And I think that this pursuit of a very real-life dream is something that almost anyone can take a lesson from after watching Space Brothers. Fourth is Inuyashiki. Whenever a friend asks me for a dark or horror-like anime, this is the one I recommend. Because not only is it 11 episodes, something that you can easily binge in one night, something that I've admittedly done on 4 separate occasions with 4 different people, but it's also really just one of the darkest shows I've watched. And it isn't just typecast as a dark show either. What's great is that it also tackles awesome ethical and moral dilemmas. Ichiro Inuyashiki is a 58-year-old man who really has absolutely nothing going on for him. He gets diagnosed with terminal cancer, his family really doesn't seem to care much about him, he finds solace in a dog he finds by the road. It kinda sucks. And then one night, after a bright light appears and things happen, he awakens and he's a robot. He looks exactly the same, but he finds that underneath the skin, he's essentially a mechanized weapon. And with this body, he also realizes that he can use these powers to save lives, something he realizes to be the only thing that gives him purpose in a life that felt meaningless. But we soon realized that someone else was also at the site when Inuyashiki was turned into a robot. And even though Inuyashiki uses his powers for good to help people, we're left with the question, what happens when someone who is not as righteous is given these powers? And so we see this really awesome dynamic between the protagonist and antagonist of the story, completely different in age, upbringing, and experiences with only one similarity. They're both looking for some kind of purpose, and I think this is Inuyashiki's biggest strength as an anime. The way that they pursue their purpose is vastly different, and so we come to not only see the variety in what life means, but on what being human means. Both characters have been looking for feelings, and they ironically felt pretty empty before even they became these emotionless robots. And so not only does Inuyashiki tackle great topics like this, but it has some really dark moments. I mean, we're seeing an indestructible teen robot kid use his powers. I think you can see where this goes. It's got some kind of cheap looking CGI at times, but it wasn't enough to turn me off from the show at all. Maybe because there's so many other merits in my eyes, or maybe because it usually isn't, completely terrible CGI, like in some other shows. Berserk 2016. And last but not least on my list is Kaiji Ultimate Survivor. Kaiji is 2 seasons, 50 episodes, and it's a psychological and thriller series. So Kaiji, the main character, is a good-for-nothing, basically. Through a series of unfortunate events, he gets tricked into a huge debt and is offered a pretty sus deal to earn it all back on an illegal gamble on a cruise ship. After this, he finds himself very quickly in a twisted and shady situation where he must essentially win at these various, sometimes life-threatening games. And the goal changes from not even just winning his money back, but simply to survive. He meets people in the same shoes that he's in, and also sees what depths they'll go to when they're put in these situations. Greed, deceit, cheating, fear. We see all of it as our main character struggles to fight against these odds. The show is most well known, I think, for its really strange art style, which might turn people off, but I watched it a really long time ago and it just captured me from the start. It is ultimately a show about gambling, about competing against others to win in some kind of game, but with such great twists and turns and psychological warfare that it's just such a fun ride. I don't personally think I took any big moral themes from this show like a lot of the other shows on this list, but it's just super entertaining and really stands out to me in this kind of psychological torment anime genre, with a really great, or at least fun to follow main character who's trying to outsmart, people who might be way smarter than him or have more power or be more willing to do terrible things to win. It keeps you on your feet throughout. And that was it for my list today. This ended up being a really long video and my throat is really parched right now, but I do hope you enjoyed and that you hopefully find some good anime recommendations from the list. If you've watched all of them, good on you, you're awesome, and that means you probably have good taste, so nice. And as always, this has been the Anime Culture Corner. I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for future in-depth show, manga, and character analyses.